There was a shimmer to America in the final decades of the 19th century, a shimmer of gold, of light reflecting off steel, of chandeliers glinting in the mansions of Fifth Avenue. But beneath that golden glow lay something else: smoke, soot, corruption, and hunger. It was the Gilded Age, the age when America dressed its vast inequalities in the glitter of progress and called it prosperity. The phrase was coined by Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner in their 1873 satire, The Gilded Age, a tale of today, a perfect title for an era when everything glittered, but not all that glittered was gold. The Gilded Age rose from the ashes of the Civil War. The Union was preserved, but the scars of brotherly slaughter had yet to heal. Industry, however, was booming. Railroads slashed through wilderness like veins of iron, linking oceans and cities, binding a fractured nation into one vast economic machine. Factories roared. Foundries poured molten steel that gleamed like liquid sunlight. Cities exploded upward, brick and smoke stacked to the heavens. In a few short decades, America became the industrial giant of the world, a land where wealth was no longer inherited from old titles, but seized through cunning, speed, and steel nerve. And at the top of this pyramid stood the new royalty, the robber barons. They were not kings in name, but in everything else they were monarchs of a new order. There was John D. Rockefeller, the austere son of a peddler, who turned black crude into gold through his empire, Standard Oil. There was Andrew Carnegie, the Scottish immigrant who had worked his way up from a bobbin boy in a cotton mill to master of steel itself. There was Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore, who built a shipping and railroad dynasty on grit and iron will. And J.P. Morgan, the banker king of Wall Street, who moved capital the way generals move armies. They built the infrastructure of modern America: railroads, refineries, telegraphs, steelworks, and in doing so they built empires that dwarfed the treasuries of nations. Their names would become synonymous with power and with something darker: greed. For every fortune made, 1,000 lives were spent. Workers toiled 12-hour days for pennies. Children coughed in the smog of textile mills, and immigrants slept 6 to a room in airless tenements. The gap between gilded mansions and gutter alleys widened into a canyon. In New York, the city became a theater of extremes. On Fifth Avenue, marble palaces rose like temples to Mammon. Inside, the wives of millionaires, the 400, as society arbiter Mrs. Carolyn Astor decreed, hosted glittering balls where diamonds shone brighter than the chandeliers. At Domenico's, the elite dined on oysters, champagne, and imported truffles. They arrived in carriages plated with gold leaf, their gowns heavy with pearls. But only a few streets away, in the labyrinth of 5 Points and Hell's Kitchen, the air stank of garbage, sweat, and despair. Immigrants, Italians, Irish, Jews, Poles crowded into dark rooms, dreaming of the same America that seemed to gleam just out of reach. The city's skyline told a story of both ascent and exclusion. The Brooklyn Bridge, completed in 1883, was the cathedral of the age, a testament to what human hands could achieve when steel met vision. Yet beneath its arches, the homeless slept in the shadows, wrapped in newspaper blankets, watching the carriages of the rich clatter overhead. If money ruled industry, corruption ruled politics. In the smoky backrooms of Tammany Hall, New York's democratic machine, led by men like boss William M. Tweed, sold power by the pound. Bribes, Kickbacks and fraud flowed as freely as whiskey. Public offices were prizes to be bought. City contracts were plundered. Tweed himself embezzled, millions enough to make him one of the richest men in America before reformers and the press brought him down in 1873. Yet politics everywhere bore the same stains. Presidents rose and fell amid scandals. Ulysses S. Grant, hero of the Civil War, saw his administration mired in graft and the whiskey ring. Rutherford B. Hayes entered office through a backroom deal that ended Reconstruction but betrayed the freedmen of the South. James Garfield was assassinated by a bitter office seeker. Chester Arthur, unexpectedly, reformed the civil service with the Pendleton Act of 1883, ending the worst of the spoils system. Corruption and reform danced a slow waltz throughout the era, each step forward met by 2 steps of resistance. But America was not blind to the darkness beneath the gold. Out of the slums, mines, and sweatshops came voices of protest unions, reformers, preachers, journalists, demanding justice in an age of opulence. The Knights of Labor rose in the 1870s, uniting workers across trades to demand fair wages and safe conditions. In Chicago, the Haymarket Riot of 1886 turned a labor rally into a massacre, forever marking the labor movement with both courage and blood. Later, the American Federation of Labor, AFL, under Samuel Gompers would fight not for revolution, but for respect, the right to organize, to be heard, to live with dignity. Meanwhile, writers and reformers began to expose the gilded rot. Henry George wrote Progress and Poverty, 1879, arguing that inequality was the shadow of industrial progress. Jacob Riis, with his haunting photographs and How the Other Half Lives, 1890, forced the nation to look into the eyes of its forgotten poor. And women like Jane Addams, founding Hull House in Chicago, pioneered social work and urban reform. It was not the roar of rebellion, but the steady rising hum of conscience. While the cities churned with factories, the frontier still beckoned. The Transcontinental Railroad had opened the West, and millions pushed beyond the Mississippi in search of land, fortune, or simply freedom. But even there, the price was steep: the dispossession of Native Americans, the plunder of their lands, and the near extermination of the buffalo. Amid this expansion, women began to step forward as never before. In the homes of reformers and the parlors of suffragists, they demanded a voice. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton carried the torch lit at Seneca Falls decades earlier. Out west in Wyoming and Utah, women won the right to vote long before their eastern sisters, a sign that the frontier, for all its lawlessness, could also be a laboratory of progress. The Gilded Age was not only about power and protest, it was also about invention, the birth of modern life. Thomas Edison lit up the darkness with the electric bulb, and Alexander Graham Bell gave voice to the telephone. Nikola Tesla, the mystic genius, dreamed of wireless power and alternating current. In the great cities, the first skyscrapers pierced the clouds. In homes, typewriters clicked and telegraphs buzzed. The rhythm of life accelerated. Time itself felt compressed by the train, the stock ticker, and the electric light. The United States was becoming something the founders could hardly have imagined: a technological empire, a nation whose greatest export would be innovation itself. By 1900, the United States stood on the edge of a new century and a new awakening. The wealth of the few had become obscene, the poverty of the many intolerable. The panic of 1893 shattered the illusion of endless prosperity. Railroads collapsed, banks failed, and hungry mobs marched in Coxey's army to Washington demanding relief. It was clear that the gold leaf was cracking. The glittering mask of the age could no longer conceal its moral corrosion. And yet out of this crucible would come the progressive era, a time of trust-busting, social reform, and the redefinition of democracy. The seeds of that awakening were sown in the Gilded Age itself, in the tension between the mansion and the tenement, between the tycoon and the worker, between greed and grace. The Gilded Age was not a mere chapter in history. It was America's adolescence, its coming of age and ambition and contradiction. It was a time when the United States became an empire not by conquest, but by commerce and capital. And like all youth, it was glorious, reckless, and cruel. Its legacy still lingers in the skyscrapers of New York, in the stock markets of Wall Street, in the faith that progress and profit are the twin pillars of civilization. But if one lesson endures from that shimmering, shadowed age, it is this: the true worth of a nation is not in its gilding, but in its heart of gold.